Mr.ShroomCaster. Life before everything fell apart feels like a distant dream now, but if I close my eyes, I can still see it. We weren't rich or extraordinary. We were just us. Mom and Dad worked regular jobs. I was in college, and my little sister was that awkward, giggly kid who tagged along everywhere. Our house wasn't big, but it was warm. It was home. Sundays were special in our family. Dad would shuffle into the kitchen in his old slippers, armed with a spatula and a terrible sense of timing. He'd burn the first batch of pancakes every single week, swearing under his breath and blaming the stove. "This thing's out to get me," he'd say, and my sister would dissolve into giggles while I rolled my eyes. Mom would stand by with her coffee, shaking her head, but there was always that little smile tugging at her lips. Sunday evenings were for movies, which usually meant something cheesy that Dad picked out. He'd settle into his spot on the couch, and without fail, he'd be snoring halfway through. Mom would nudge him, trying to act annoyed, but her tone always betrayed her. "Why do you even bother?" she'd ask, and he'd mumble something about spending time together. It was predictable and silly, and I loved it more than I ever admitted back then. Dad wasn't a man of many words, but the ones he said mattered. Once, when I was about 18, he told me, "Life's gonna knock you down sometimes, but if you know where you're going, you'll always find a way to get back up." I didn't really understand it then. I thought I had it all figured out. I was in college, planning to graduate, maybe move to Chicago or New York. I wanted to travel, see the world, live for myself. But life doesn't care about your plans. Dad's death was like a tidal wave. One minute, he was there, and the next, he wasn't. A heart attack. Out of nowhere. We didn't even know he was sick. He was just gone. The day I found out, everything inside me froze. The funeral felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. Mom tried to hold herself together, but I'd hear her sobbing in the middle of the night. My sister, barely 10 at the time, didn't understand. She'd just sit quietly, hugging her stuffed bear, asking me questions I couldn't answer. And me? I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Someone had to step up. I dropped out of college a few months later. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd go back once things were stable. But stability never came. Bills piled up. Mom started struggling with everything, and I couldn't stand the thought of us losing the house on top of everything else. So, I took on the responsibility. Just for now, I kept telling myself. Just until we get back on our feet. Fast forward 7 years. Now, I wake up at 6 every morning, my phone alarm blaring. I drag myself out of bed, get ready, and head to my first job. By mid-afternoon, I'm at my second. I come home late, too tired to eat most nights, and fall into bed, knowing I'll do it all again tomorrow. My sister isn't a little kid anymore. She's 17 now, full of sass and opinions. Don't get me wrong, I love her. But sometimes, it feels like she takes me for granted. She expects me to solve her problems, lend her money, give her advice, and be there whenever she needs me. And Mom's different now. She's not the strong, steady person I remember from before. She leans on me a lot, financially, emotionally, in every way. She says things like, "We have to stick together," and I get it. I really do. But sometimes, I feel like I'm the one holding everything together while they get to lean on me. The life I dreamed about, college, a career, a small apartment in a big city. It feels like a distant memory, something that belonged to someone else. My days are a constant cycle of working, worrying, and making sure everyone else is okay. And me? I'm not even sure who I am anymore. It's strange how quickly dysfunction becomes normal. At some point, you stop noticing the cracks because you're too busy trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart. That's what my life feels like now. One endless balancing act. The house is quiet most of the time, but not in the peaceful way it used to be. It's the kind of quiet that hums with tension, like the air right before a storm. Mom spends most of her time sitting in the living room, her coffee cup always within reach, even if it's just filled with lukewarm leftovers from the morning. She stares at the TV a lot, but I don't think she's really watching. It's just background noise for her thoughts. Occasionally, she'll try to talk to me about something, usually bills or how she's worried about my sister. But lately, it feels less like a conversation and more like a monologue I'm expected to listen to. "I'm doing the best I can," she'll say, her voice tinged with frustration, like she's trying to convince herself more than me. It's not easy, you know, raising 2 kids on your own. I don't argue. What's the point? I just nod and say something neutral like, "I know, Mom," even though I'm screaming inside. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 27 years old, working 2 jobs, and still stuck in this house trying to hold everything together. But I never say that out loud. It wouldn't change anything. Then there's my sister. She's 17 now, right on the edge of adulthood, but clinging to her role as the baby of the family. She's smart, too smart, honestly. She's got this way of twisting everything so it works in her favor. If I say no to her, I'm the villain. If I say yes, I'm enabling her. Either way, I lose. Take last week, for example. She wanted money for some school dance. It's important, she said, leaning against the kitchen counter while I was trying to make dinner. Everyone's going, and I can't show up looking like a loser. I can't, I told her without looking up. I'm already short this month. Ask Mom. Her tone changed instantly, sharp and accusatory. You always say that. Mom doesn't have any money, and you know it. Why can't you just help me for once? For once, I repeated, turning to face her. Do you even hear yourself? Everything I do is for you and Mom. She rolled her eyes and stormed off, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The door to her room slammed so hard it shook the pictures on the walls. Mom came into the kitchen a few minutes later, coffee cup in hand like always. What was that about? She asked, her voice tired. She wanted money for a dance, I said, stirring the pot of spaghetti sauce. Mom sighed and sat down at the table. You know, she's been through a lot. We all have. There it was again, that invisible chain, wrapping tighter around me every time she said those words. We've all been through a lot. As if that's supposed to justify everything. As if my own struggles don't count because I'm the strong one. I didn't respond. I just kept stirring the sauce, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Later that night, after dinner, I was sitting at the kitchen table going over the bills. Rent, utilities, groceries. It never ends. Mom came in and sat across from me. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she said, almost too casually, you know, I was thinking, maybe you could pick up a few extra hours at work. I looked up at her, stunned. I'm already working 2 jobs. How much more do you think I can handle? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her coffee, swirling the spoon around like it was the most interesting thing in the world. I just mean you're young. You can handle it better than I can. That hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to scream, to tell her how tired I was, how I hadn't had a real day off in months, how I felt like I was drowning. But I didn't. I just nodded and went back to the bills. That's how it always goes. Mom leans on me because she thinks I can handle it. My sister pushes boundaries because she knows I won't push back. And me? I just keep going, because what else can I do? Sometimes I wonder if they even notice how close I am to breaking. Or maybe they do, and they just don't care. As long as the bills are paid, the lights stay on, and dinner shows up on the table. Being the one who always has it together means no one bothers to ask if you're okay. They just assume you'll keep going, no matter what. But everyone has a limit. It was a Tuesday, because of course it was. Tuesdays always feel like the world's reminder that the weekend is far behind and still out of reach. I'd just gotten home from my first shift, bone-tired and aching. My uniform smelled like grease and coffee. My shoes were sticky from the floor at work, and my stomach growled loudly enough to make me cringe. All I wanted was a shower and a bite to eat before heading to my second job. As soon as I stepped through the door, though, I knew something was off. The house felt too still, like everyone was holding their breath. There was no hum of the TV, no sister yelling at her phone, no sound of Mom moving around the kitchen, just silence. I dropped my bag by the door and called out, I'm home. Mom's voice came from the living room, tight and controlled. We need to talk. I froze for a second, my hands still on the strap of my bag. Those 4 words were never a good sign. I stepped into the living room to find her sitting on the couch, clutching her coffee mug like it might shatter if she loosened her grip. My sister was sprawled on the armrest. Scrolling through her phone like this had nothing to do with her. What's going on? I asked, though my gut already told me I wasn't going to like the answer. Mom didn't waste time. Your sister needs money for her senior trip, she said. The school's collecting deposits this week, and I don't have it. For a moment, I just stared at her, waiting for the part where she explained how this was someone else's problem. When it didn't come, I felt my stomach sink. And you think I do? You work 2 jobs, she said, her tone almost casual, like that made perfect sense. I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. Yeah, to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Not to cover extra stuff like this. Mom sighed, that weary, disappointed sound she perfected over the years. Don't make this into a big deal. It's important for her to go. This is her senior year. Before I could respond, my sister chimed in without even looking up from her phone. Yeah, it's not like I'm asking for a car or something. Her nonchalance hit me like a slap. Do you have any idea how hard I work to keep this house running? And now you want me to just magically come up with money for a trip? She looked up at me then, her face twisting into that expression teenagers are so good at. Half pity, half annoyance. God, why are you always like this? It's not that big a deal. I could feel my chest tightening, anger bubbling up in a way I couldn't control. Not that big a deal? Do you even realize what I've given up for this family? I dropped out of school, gave up everything I wanted, just so you two could have what you need. And now you're acting like I'm some villain because I can't pay for a vacation? It's not a vacation, she snapped, standing up. It's my senior trip. Everyone's going. But of course, you don't care about that because you're too busy being miserable all the time. Miserable? The word hit like a knife. You have no idea what it's like to be me. I'm the one working my ass off to make sure this house doesn't fall apart, while you sit around acting like the world owes you something. That's enough. Mom's voice cut through the room like a whip. She stood up, her coffee cup abandoned on the table. We've all been through a lot. Don't take it out on her. Her words left me stunned. Take it out on her? I repeated, my voice trembling. What about me, Mom? When was the last time anyone cared about what I need, or even asked how I'm doing? The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Mom's face softened for a moment, and I thought, just for a second, that maybe she understood. But then she sighed and said, this isn't about you. It's about the family. We have to stick together. That was it. The last straw. I'm done, I said, my voice low but firm. I can't keep doing this. I'm working myself to death, and all I get in return is guilt trips and more demands. I'm not your ATM. I'm not your therapist. And I'm not the reason this family is falling apart. No one said anything as I grabbed my bag and walked out the door. My heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The tears came fast and hot, years of frustration and exhaustion pouring out of me all at once. I didn't even know where to go. I just knew I couldn't stay there anymore. Sometimes, when you finally let yourself break, you realize there's no going back. You can't rebuild the same version of yourself that everyone relied on, the one who carried everything without complaint. And honestly, I didn't want to. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly through town, my thoughts a tangled mess. The streetlights blurred through my tears, and the weight on my chest felt unbearable. Eventually, I parked in an empty lot outside a closed diner. I sat there for hours, staring at the darkened, open 24 hours sign, wondering how I'd gotten here. By the time the sun started creeping over the horizon, I made a decision. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and for the first time in years, I was ready to put myself first. The next day, I called out sick from both jobs. I'd never done that before. Taking a day off felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. But that morning, I didn't care. I stayed in bed until noon, ignoring the missed calls and texts from Mom and my sister. When I finally got up, I grabbed my laptop and started Googling. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. How to set boundaries with family was my first search. That led to articles about toxic relationships, emotional burnout, and something called parentification. I clicked link after link, my eyes scanning paragraphs that felt like they'd been written about my life. One article stuck with me. It was about the importance of setting boundaries, even with people you love. The author wrote, saying no doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about yourself, too. I read that line over and over, like a mantra. It felt like permission, something I didn't realize I needed until that moment. A few days later, I did something I never thought I'd do. I booked an appointment with a therapist. It felt strange at first, admitting I needed help. For so long, I convinced myself that I could handle everything on my own, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But as I sat in the waiting room, nervously scrolling through my phone, I realized how desperate I was for someone to just listen. The first session was harder than I expected. When the therapist asked why I was there, I hesitated. How do you sum up years of frustration, exhaustion, and resentment in a single sentence? I guess. I feel like I've been living for everyone else, I said finally. And I don't even know who I am anymore. She nodded, her expression calm and understanding. That's a heavy burden to carry, she said. Let's talk about how we can start to lighten it. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As the weeks went on, I started to make small changes. They didn't come easily. Every no felt like a battle. The first time I told my sister I couldn't give her money for something, she exploded. You don't care about me, she yelled, slamming her door. It hurt, but I didn't back down. With Mom, it was harder. She'd grown so used to relying on me that even the smallest pushback felt like betrayal. When I told her I couldn't keep covering the bills on my own, her face fell. "I don't know what we're going to do," she said, her voice trembling. I felt a pang of guilt, but I reminded myself of that line from the article. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care. Then came the job offer. I'd applied months ago, almost as a joke. It was for a position at a small marketing firm in the city. Better pay, normal hours, and a chance to start fresh. I'd forgotten about it until the email popped up in my inbox. "We'd like to schedule an interview." My heart raced as I stared at the screen. It felt like the universe was finally giving me an out, but taking it meant leaving everything and everyone I'd spent years holding together. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, torn between the life I wanted and the life I'd been stuck in for so long. Making the decision wasn't easy. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the only way forward was to jump and hope I'd land safely. But the truth? I couldn't stay where I was anymore. The job offer sat in my inbox for 2 days before I mustered up the courage to respond. The interview went better than I expected, and within a week, I had an official offer. A solid salary, normal hours, and a chance to move to the city I dreamed of for years. But taking it meant leaving them. The night I told Mom, I could feel the tension building before I even opened my mouth. She was sitting in her usual spot on the couch, her coffee cup balanced on the armrest. My sister was on the floor, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. "I need to talk to you," I said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Mom looked up, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" I took a deep breath, my palms sweating. "I got a job offer. In the city. I'm going to take it." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Mom blinked, her mouth opening and closing like she wasn't sure what to say. Finally, she managed, "You're leaving?" "I have to," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't keep living like this, Mom. I'm tired. I need to start my own life." "But what about us?" Her voice cracked, and I could see the tears welling in her eyes. "We need you here." "No, you don't," I said, trying to stay calm. "You've leaned on me for so long that you've forgotten how to stand on your own. But you can do it. You and her both." I glanced at my sister, who was now staring at me, wide-eyed. "This isn't fair," Mom said, her voice rising. "After everything we've been through, after everything I've done for you, you're just going to leave us?" The guilt hit hard, but I held my ground. "It's not about leaving you. It's about finding me. I've spent years putting myself last, and I can't do it anymore." My sister finally spoke, her voice sharp. "So that's it? You're just walking out on us?" "I'm not walking out," I said firmly. "I'll still be here for you both. But I can't keep sacrificing my life for everyone else's. I won't." The weeks leading up to the move were tense. Mom barely spoke to me, and my sister alternated between sulking and throwing little jabs about how I was abandoning them. I tried not to let it get to me, but it hurt. It was hard not to feel like the bad guy, even though I knew I was doing the right thing. Packing up my room felt surreal. Every item I put into a box was a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. But it was also a reminder of why I needed to go. On my last night in the house, Mom finally broke the silence. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea, and trying not to think about how strange it felt to be leaving. She sat down across from me, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "I'm scared," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the table. I looked at her, surprised. "Scared of what?" "Of failing. Of losing everything." She finally looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the vulnerability in her eyes. "You've been the strong one for so long. I don't even know how to do this without you." Her words hit me hard, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You're stronger than you think," I said gently. "You always have been. You just forgot." She nodded slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't want you to go, but I get it. I really do." Moving day came quicker than I expected. My sister barely said goodbye, mumbling something about how she had homework to do. Mom hugged me tightly, her tears soaking into my shirt. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "You too," I said, my throat tightening. As I drove away, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, sadness, relief. But above all, I felt free. For the first time in years, my life was mine again.